Here begins the fourth and final segment of my Pencast conversation with Lars Karlsson, Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting at AP Møller-Maersk.
Now, why I'm explaining that is that all through I've also had an academic continued career in customs. So I'm a doctor of education, I'm a master's in international customs law, and been working with think tanks and people like yourself and some of your colleagues in the past as well, right? Because there need to be a professionalism in what we do, and there need to be more innovation, which we have been talking about a long time already on this podcast now, right? So I've been a firm believer. I always say learning is life, life is learning, right? So I certainly genuinely believe in innovation, in sharing, in training, in inspiring projects and so forth. So to answer your question without billing you, this is absolutely a key question, Tom. How do we bridge the gap more and more now? Because I've been in international institutions. I've been head of a government agency, run operationally on the ground, single trade windows and stuff like that, and implementation and operations. But I've also been on the other side now for 14 years in private sector executive positions, doing the other side of development, right? And one thing I do know is that there's common goals here. We all want the same thing. So there's a super win-win between what government agencies, less resources, more demands, tougher environment, enforcement security is coming as a big new area the last 10, 15 years. Then you have all of these kind of growth, development, trade facilitation issues, trade on top of that. So it's a tough job today. And if you add on ESG, and we have to talk a couple of minutes of that as well today, right? Then you're just in the middle of the world, genuinely, where how it's developing. So yes, how do we foster that? Well, I believe much more, and we do in Maersk, and that's also how we work to bridge that gap. That's why on consulting, as an example, we do consulting projects with government agencies in 60, 65, 70 countries around the world, because we have that knowledge, competence. Many of us have worked with doing these developments before. We do that, but it's still the small part of what we do. Mainly it's 80%, of course, also on consulting and advisory service is with our clients, the private sector clients. But bridging the gap of how you do that together is the key. And getting also international institutions involved. So again, of course, we are active partners in many of these think tanks, networks. We are happy to be part of more of them. We are definitely in the private sector consultative groups of everyone from WCO to OECD to WTO when they have open forums and so forth, and many others as well, including UPU as an example. And the reason for that is that we want to help bridging that gap. But what we don't want is only being part of advice to a policy discussion. And I think that's where we've been so far, if I'm going to be really practical about it. And that means we, not only us, private sector, Maersk and big players in that, but also you guys and international institutions, because that's part of the mandate more than practical projects on the ground testing what works or not. But I think there's a huge opportunity, and we've been doing it now this last 3 or 4 years, becoming more practical in testing hypotheses, testing pilots, doing real things on the ground. And the lack today, or the weakness today we have, is that we do this anyway with one partner or with one government agency around the world. It could be developed countries or it could be emerging economies. Doesn't matter. Then we don't have, just like the TradeLens example, people like yourself involved, or ICC or World Bank or WCO, or whoever it might be, right? That could be a part of the project for research reasons, for scalability reasons, for taking it to the policy levels, or for making the lobby we can't do for a solution that is not our solution, but a general solution. So the role of the WCO, and I always say that when I go to meeting to my beloved old organization, that you need to be there on a practical level, because you need to be the guarantor that this is a guaranteed solution that works both for developing countries and developed countries. And it works for everyone, not only for, Maersk in US and EU or whatever it is, or only for China and India. So I think that what we are not good at doing is picking up and scale good tests we do in a kind of bilateral environment today. What we need to do is find the arenas. And there is one, I'll mention that one. That's World Economic Forum, Global Alliance Trade Facilitation. They are doing in not huge scale, but still more practical pilot type of support where they are the guarantor towards the international institutions and the donors, while we are bringing in ourselves and many other, sometimes competitors, into a project on the ground with the government, and we test things on the ground, and we remove 60% of the, say, discussion we have if it's possible or not, because, yeah, it is possible. We just show it on the ground. And then we have a real discussion of how do we make that a part of how we do things. I call it basically more flexible standardization, right? So what we need is framework legislation. Like I mentioned before, the UK Electronic Trade Documents Act, 2.5 pages said this is how we do digitalization. It's now legal. Well, that's enough. You don't need to detail, regulate it in a way where nobody can apply it. It needs to be one step up. And that's where I think researchers, specialists, scientists, all the good people, academia in various kinds need to come to us and we to you and find also the neutral platform. That could be different from different times. We need to find a number of new platforms where we do practical things, because our client says, final point on it, many people in the institutional world I know, in government world, say, well, private sector don't want to share data. I've never experienced that in my life. If you know the purpose, you know why it's going to be done, how it's going to be done, and the reasons for it, and what's the benefits for us for doing it, the incentives to do that. They share data every time in all projects we do.
That's
so
fascinating.
It is about, and really when we do this sharing of voluntary information to get into smarter risking or early warning systems to de-risk and so forth, will make the borders better. It's more a problem on the government side, which we all know from single trade windows, that they can't exchange it between agencies on the inside. So there becomes a problem in government of coordinating. We say coordinated border management. In reality, it's just, very difficult to do. So there are some of these, say, breaks we could look into, and you can do it easier than we can. We can do the practical pilot together with clients and with government agencies. But in reality, somebody then needs to pick that up, make sense of it, and make a scalable kind of proposal that can go to decision makers, or could be G20, could be EU, could be anybody. That's how it's.
We're working now on a project of film. I'm working with a very good filmmaker, John Downer, to create a series of films about customs, about the challenges of customs on the one hand, growing every day, and technological solutions on the other hand, to try to bridge this gap between academia and research institutions on the one hand, make people aware in the research world what incredibly exciting, sexy problems and socially important problems there are that they could turn loose their own creativity and their PhD students' creativity on. How much does Maersk work with research scientists, or do you just kind of hire them into? Do you work with universities and sort of?
We do. No, we do. We've had a number of projects, and we are more and more doing it. And of course, from my world, coming also from the WCO, and I worked with you guys through that type of arena in the EU as well, where you have your background, many of you, but also through the International Network of Customs Universities, which I was part of starting together with, David Widdowson and the people at CCES in Australia and many others. But again, we need to take that to the next level. So I'm going to be, self-critical about it. We need to do more in this. And we rather put our time and effort into doing stuff and using, when we can, clients' data together with clients and so forth, rather than hiring a researcher. And we've had those discussions with people as well. It becomes long. It becomes, because these processes are not quick fixes, right? So we know that research that's not how we get it. So getting practical projects that also, shows real results of how we then can feed our own development, let's put it this way, from it. But at the same time, then somebody else picks up the kind of scalability or the standardization piece or whatever you say about it from various reasons, and becoming that neutral guarantor, saying that, this is something we really could use because these results are really good. I think that for me, those type of partnership consortia type of really concrete things is the future. I think and again, we pick up the phone to DHL sometimes. I have good colleagues and friends and former employees there as well. And we work together, and they say, shouldn't you come in on this? Because, sometimes we are partners, sometimes we are competitors. It doesn't matter. We want the same thing. And again, we are sometimes missing that piece. Otherwise, if we are working directly with researchers, we do that as well. But I'd rather go to these kind of public or transparent type of practical projects on the ground. And you're an expert in this field, so it sounds simple to do that. It's not so simple, but I think you would find that more and more companies like ourselves are willing to do that, to test on the ground. And more, in my experience, government agencies are interested and governments are interested to do that as well in the big markets, which is also interesting. But again, not they either. The government agency doesn't say either. Shouldn't we have some researchers involved here so that they really could document and learn from this? And this would be easier to scale to others instead of a bilateral dialogue between US and UK. If we have somebody else involved, it could grow much quicker and find other wings and to actually take it much further if it's something good. If it's not good, we learn from that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, PenCP as so many others, groups is part of the Horizon EU funded Horizon 2020 program, and I
love it. Right. So of course, I wasn't specific on that. What you guys could do, or what we could do in this framework, I think we can do much more. I'm certainly interested in also bringing in other companies and other colleagues that we do work with these things to more practically. And I would advise anybody listening to this to take a look at this, because you've been doing some fantastic projects in the past that I've learned from in various capacities in my previous life, right? So I think that is something we'll certainly be interested in. And for me, it's just necessary for doing that, vision that we talked about in the future. You need to be involved, and much more than in the past.
It is an interesting experiment. And as you say, there are some challenges in getting everyone around the table. If you have universities and research institutes and customs officials and, large corporations and various others, if they may not always be speaking the same language, but the EU funded Horizon project is a good consortium model to force people to come together and work on problems together. So it's an exciting.
Well, as you said, it's exciting, but it's a zoo of different animals. Let's face it. Also, you and me know that that's the case. So I think that specifically from if I take my private sector hat on here, which is the one I've been wearing the last decade or more, of course, what it needs to be for companies like us and others to really fully commit to this type of things, they also need to be this practical arm. They need to be an operational arm of it. It needs to be already from the beginning set out to be tested. I know you as an example have, and also the Institute and others, and I mentioned Global Alliance before, has that kind of approach, but many of the international institutions have not, because it's not their role. It's not their role description from their members and the countries to do that. But I think we more and more need to operationalize these, having an idea, how is this going to be tested, and do it on a voluntary basis. Which companies are interested? Raise your hand. Which countries would be good because they will cover an emerging economy, a really developing country, and then a developed country as well. And that's a trade corridor we could look at, or whatever it is, right? Being practical and test it out. That is what, drives, I think, the engagement of the private sector to be involved in these type of research projects. Well, that's not, again, rocket science to say that. I know we already known that for a long period of time, but I think there's an arena now. There's everything is moving so quickly, so we need to do this accelerated, and then we need to get all the good forces together. And I agree with you. I think this is a good program to actually do that through. So let's explore that. So we are certainly interested in doing that.
Excellent. Yeah. And as you say, 5 years is your sort of window of opportunity. You need everyone pulling on the same rope in the same direction, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of fives, I'm looking at the clock and see we have 5 minutes left. And I have about 5 hours worth of questions. So I will make it very brief. I'd love to hear a little bit about KGH, your experience in founding that company and running it, and the transition into Maersk. And again, that's a big question. It's not fair to you, but you have 4 minutes.
Yeah, let's try and do it anyway. No, of course, it was a company that's been there for a long period of time, basically from Sweden and Norwegian border, as originally a broker between Sweden and Norway, the broker on the Swedish-Norwegian border. The Swedish-Norwegian border is interesting because it's the longest European Union border. It is also the most advanced border in the world. And the reason for that was that you had two governments on each side where trade is important. You're far away from markets. And it's also big-sized countries and in developed countries in many ways. So there was a really interesting thing happening on that specific border. It basically became a test bench for the international standards we have for international trade today to large extent. So that's how I got involved in the beginning. Or we actually in Swedish Custom brought in that version, old version of KGH as a Scandinavian broker into that type of development environment, and they were doing a lot of really good work there. Then, of course, something happened. It was reshaped, and there were new owners and a number of other things, and some of us came into the company, and it got a totally different view. It was really to become a pan-European customs border expert company in digital, in consulting advisory services, in the brokerage services, in advanced ways, and so forth. And of course, that in itself was a journey, right? And with acquisitions and with organic growth and a number of other things. So these were days where the company grew from around 150, 200 people into 800-900, and today 1,300 people in Europe. And of course, it also was the biggest independent company in that field in Europe at the time. So of course, when that merged into the Maersk strategy of becoming an integrator where customs and borders becomes extremely important if you want an end-to-end solution in place, they needed that capacity. So they basically came to us, and we had a 2-year interesting journey of finding matching interests of going forward together, and ended up with Maersk acquiring KGH 3 years ago, and a little bit more. And the interesting thing was that they really wanted what we were doing, right? And then, of course, the discussion I and others, some of my other colleagues had with Maersk leadership at the time was, okay, now we have taken a leapfrog here on customs in Europe. We also want to do the same in the other 4 regions of Europe, and we want to connect the dots and make it interoperable all around the world with one type of basic platform, solution, model, processing, and so forth, and start collecting that data and start actually doing that many of us in various other roles have been talking about for a long period of time, mainly, using the export, the first element of data, the booking information, or when I buy something that goes into an export declaration somewhere, all through the supply chain into the import declaration at the end of the day, the delivery, right, from a customs perspective. So that was the vision. That's still the vision. And that was why there was a really good match in this. And then people came to me and said, look, we want to do this in the other, come and do a KGH in the other 4 regions as well, because that's what we need. And that becomes then Maersk Customs Services, which it is today, a part of what we call Managed by Maersk, which is the managed services of that integrated strategy that we talk about. So I have some really interesting colleagues here in this part of Maersk, in logistics and services. We have e-commerce, we have lead logistics, we have cold chain, we have special projects and different type of solutions that clients need, but not as silos anymore, but actually as an integrated type of service. So obviously that meant a couple of things. One thing was, and that's still something we are working on, is the fact that what was a big client for a European company like KGH is a very small client for Maersk. And a big client for Maersk we didn't have very many of in KGH. Yeah. And of course, the dynamism is different with what we call, key accounts and what we in KGH call key accounts. So we are cracking the code of those type of things. How do we manage a global company, a global partner and client in a way with using this? And we had some other acquisitions as well. But it was a really interesting journey that we are still, every day trying to get the most out of. But it's an interesting process because it's the first time we are really trying to develop something where we are global, because we know global and we have the context we talked about here and the visions we have here. We are local because we have people on the ground everywhere, so we can connect customs expert in Malaysia with customs expert in the UK. And we have the facilities to do all of these steps of the process from a customs perspective, but more importantly, a customs strategy that takes into account, again, free trade agreements, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them that is underutilized to 50% sometimes. How do you utilize them in a better way? How do you become compliant so you don't get the delays and the fines we talked about or draconic penalties somewhere? And one thing we work really, really with now, which will be my kind of summary here, is as I mentioned it several times, the ESG, right? Environment, social protection, and governance. Of course, we already have 4 of these regulations in place. We have the forced labor legislation, UFLPA in US. We have the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act in Europe. And after that, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and soon deforestation legislation from end of this year. All these regulations are different, right, from 2 perspectives. The regulator has said it's not going to be a regulation I will enforce and look at when you come to me. I want you to control all tiers of your supply chain. So you need to go backwards and before make sure it works from wherever you get your sourcing or wherever the footprint from the producer or whatever it is. And you need to gather that up and you need to report it before you actually do your reporting. That is the traditional reporting. And then we will audit you. So it reverses really the proof of burden in many senses here. So you need to know your supply chain in a totally different way.
In a sense, you're doing what you were talking about, moving the border off the border, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's the whole point. What was happening with Safe Framework Standards post 9/11 was that if something happens, it better happens over there than not in my homeland, right? So discover it as quick as possible. And this is the same type of logic. They're all different, but we're also looking at 10 more legislations of that kind in various geographies. So you have UK, you have Australia, you have CBAM in US now coming up, and the list goes on. And they will all be a little bit different, but they will have the same mechanism. You need to be able to know your stakeholders. You need to be able to vet your stakeholders in the supply chain, know who you partner with. You need to be able to collect data at one point or another. Sometimes it is the customs data that we have talked about all through today, right? That you have that and you can actually at the right time submit it. But you also need to add on new data pools and new data points, right? Like if it's carbon emission or if it's geographical data where you actually grew the crops that is a part of that product that we are now checking for deforestation in European Union or later in US or wherever it is. And you need to not only collect it, but you also need to manage it and you need to be ready to put it forward. Now, you could say that it's been a delegation of all of these obligations to save the planet to trade. Now we're ready to take that journey, right? We just don't want green tape to replace red tape and add on to the trade barriers we have talked about all through today. So this time we need to do it smarter, but it goes well with what we've been talking about, right? You need to know your supply chain for other reasons, for efficiency reasons, for be able to deliver on time, to have resilience and not get caught by delays. If you do that, you can do the other stuff as well on ESG. And those who have solutions and systems for that in place, or at least a plan in place early, will be able to use basically the same setup for doesn't matter if it's UK, Australia, Japan, or somewhere else. You have the regulation in place because you will be able to twist it because you have all the data anyway for another market or for another reason. And that is what we want to achieve. But people need to understand that this is coming big time. These are regulations that also have draconic penalties and market access mechanisms in them. And believe me, the regulator sooner or later at one point will start enforcing that. Mm-hmm. And you need to be the one that doesn't get caught in that pan, right? Right. And more importantly, I think those who do it early in the process will be the winners because you will be ahead of your competition, right? So that's going to be an opportunity instead of a problem.
A theme that's gone through our conversation is the way in which the world is changing and the way in which that enables rapid change. Our attitudes, changing the world by changing the world's mind. Our attitudes towards ESG today are very different from 5 years ago, very different from 10 years ago. Deforestation and climate change and other things are things that are now urgent for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
They just weren't until recently. So it's a great position.
The future consumer or the present consumer will not buy your product if you haven't done this correctly. If you're the ones on the headlines with this, they won't buy your product anymore. You're dead.
Yeah. No,
so
exactly.
These become strategic issues, right? Which also puts the customs and the borders and the efficiency and the compliance from other perspectives into play. But again, the good news, of course, and the final message from me today is that if you actually do it, you will make money. Because today these companies leave money on the table. by not doing this. It's just that the reward has become much bigger because you will also be able to sleep better at night. You will be able to be ahead of your competitors, right? So this is the event, but you would make money from day one if you actually put these strategic plans in place. We do that every time with every client we have, and I'm sure others do as well. So, that's the advice. Take control, find a model that suits you, ask the right partners to work with you, and yet, own your own data.
Thank you very, very much for a great conversation. Lars Karlsson, Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting at Maersk.
Thank you very much, Tom. A pleasure. Happy to have the conversation again another time.
This concludes the fourth and final part of my Pencast conversation with Mr. Tony Smith, CBE, former Director General of the UK Border Force, now Managing Director of Fortinus Global, and founding chair of IBMATA. Join us soon for another conversation with customs trendsetters and forward thinkers. Thank you.